In the heart of a small and forgotten town, a boy named Arman lived in the shadows of society. He was no more than 12 years old, yet his thin frame and hollow cheeks made him appear older, burdened by hardships no child should ever endure. The people knew him only as the orphan who wandered the streets, a silent figure moving between alleyways and empty corners, clutching scraps of bread or an old blanket that barely kept him warm. He had no home, no family, and no place where he truly belonged. When night fell, he would slip into abandoned buildings, hiding from the cold wind that cut through broken windows. In the mornings, he appeared like a ghost, quietly observing the world but never quite part of it. Children of his age played in the dusty fields or walked to school with books in hand. But Arman was different. His life had no laughter, no lessons, and no warmth of companionship. He carried an invisible weight, something that made his silence more unsettling than words could ever be. His eyes, dark and deep, seemed to hold secrets that no one dared to ask about. Though he rarely spoke, those who crossed paths with him often remembered the sadness that lingered in his stare. Behind his quiet existence was a story hidden from the world. He had once lived with people who called themselves his guardians, but their care was never rooted in love. It was a life filled with fear and mistrust, a past that followed him even when he tried to escape. Arman knew that his silence was his shield, yet he also knew that silence could not protect him forever. In every shadow he stepped into, he feared the past would one day return to claim him. The quiet town began to change as winter crept in, bringing with it more than just the cold winds. Small incidents unsettled the people. Windows cracked open in the night, doors left swinging as if touched by unseen hands, and food stolen from pantries without a trace. At first, no one thought much of it. In a place where everyone knew each other, the idea of crime felt distant, almost impossible. But when the incidents became frequent, whispers spread like smoke in the air. Some believed it was a work of local boys playing cruel tricks, while others muttered about darker forces at play. In those hushed conversations, Arman's name began to surface. The orphan had always been an outsider, a figure who drifted silently and appeared in places where no one expected him. Some pitied him, others distrusted him, and soon suspicion began to cling to his name. People wondered if his silence was not innocence, but secrecy. Yet behind those assumptions, Arman carried knowledge that no one else had. He was not the one breaking into homes, but he had seen who was. The shadows that haunted him were not imaginary. They belonged to the very people he had once called guardians. These were not caretakers, but dangerous individuals who lived behind masks of respectability. By day, they blended into the town, unnoticed. By night, they preyed upon the weak, using fear as their weapon. Arman had escaped their grasp once, but he knew they never stopped searching. The strange disturbances that now plagued the town were proof that their reach was closer than anyone realized. Each theft, each broken lock, was a silent warning. And though the townsfolk whispered his name with suspicion, Arman alone understood that the danger lurking among them was far greater than anyone dared to imagine. One cold night, the boy who had become a ghostly presence in the town was gone. His usual corner beneath the crumbling roof stood empty, his thin blanket tossed aside, as though someone had ripped it from his grasp. His few possessions, a broken shoe, a rusted tin cup, and a scrap of cloth he used as a pillow, were scattered across the floor. To anyone passing by, it looked as though he had vanished without a trace. At first, no one paid attention. After all, Arman had always been a wanderer, slipping from one place to another without explanation. Many assumed he had finally left the town to search for a better life elsewhere. But as days turned into weeks, the silence surrounding his absence began to feel heavier. People started to wonder why the boy who survived every storm, who endured hunger and cold, would suddenly disappear without even the smallest sign of struggle. Others claimed they had seen shadows near the abandoned house where he often slept, figures moving quietly in the dark. Some whispered that the same unseen hands responsible for the recent disturbances had taken him away. The few who pitied Arman feared something worse. They knew he had lived a life far too complicated for a child, and his vanishing felt less like an escape, and more like the closing of a chapter he had never been allowed to write. The town, once dismissive of him, now carried a strange unease, as though they had overlooked a truth waiting to surface. Was he hiding somewhere, too frightened to return? Or had the people from his past finally caught up with him? The mystery of his disappearance grew darker each day, leaving behind questions with no answers. Months passed, and the boy's disappearance began to fade into the background of everyday life. The town returned to its routines, though a faint unease lingered. Then, one late evening, flames lit up the sky at the edge of the town. An old abandoned house, long ignored and crumbling with decay, was engulfed in fire. By the time the blaze was brought under control, the structure was a blackened skeleton, but the investigation that followed uncovered something far more disturbing than the fire itself. Beneath the charred floorboards, hidden rooms were discovered. These spaces were small, suffocating, and reinforced with locks on the outside. Inside were rusted chains fixed to the walls, scraps of clothing, and personal belongings that did not belong to anyone known in the town. Among the scattered remains were items that struck a chilling familiarity: a tin cup, a torn cloth that once served as a blanket, and a small shoe that townsfolk remembered seeing with Arman. It became clear that this was no ordinary abandoned house. It had been a prison in disguise, a place where shadows carried out unspeakable acts. The silence surrounding Arman's life now made sense. He had lived under the constant threat of those who controlled this hidden world. The people who had once been suspected of petty thefts and strange disturbances were not mischievous neighbors, but members of something darker, an organized ring that preyed on the vulnerable. Arman was not only a runaway, he was a survivor who had uncovered too much. The town realized that while they pitied him from afar, he had been walking on the edge of danger every single day. The fire may have destroyed the building, but it revealed the truth about the horrors that had remained buried in plain sight. The fire had revealed horrors no one in the town could ignore, but it did not answer the most important question. What happened to Arman? His belongings had been found in the hidden rooms, yet his body was nowhere among the ashes. This mystery deepened the fear that gripped the community. Some believed he had been taken elsewhere before the fire began, his captors erasing evidence to cover their tracks. Others whispered that he had died long before, buried in some forgotten place where no one would ever find him. A few held on to hope, imagining that he had used the chaos of the blaze as his chance to escape, running far away to start a new life under another name. The uncertainty turned his story into a haunting legend. Families who had once ignored the orphan now spoke of him in hushed tones, realizing how blind they had been to his suffering. His silence, once mistaken for strangeness, was understood too late as a cry for help. The very people who walked past him every day had failed to see the shadows chasing him, and now they carried the weight of that guilt. With every retelling, his story became more than just the disappearance of a child. It was a reminder of the cruelty hidden behind closed doors and the dangers that thrive when no one chooses to notice. Arman's silent tears became a symbol for the countless forgotten children who lived lives of fear and neglect. Though the case was never solved, the memory of the boy lingered like a cold wind through the town, impossible to ignore. He remained a ghost in their minds, a lost soul whose absence spoke louder than words, and whose fate continues to cast a shadow that time cannot erase.